A lighthouse keeper in Brazil allegedly died when snakes came through his window. A town in Pennsylvania has been on fire underground since 1962, and a lake in Antarctica sat sealed under 2 miles of ice for 1,000,000 years, until we drilled into it anyway, because apparently that's just what we do. 7 places on Earth that should be empty. A few of them aren't. Location 1. Ilha da Queimada Grande, Brazil, Snake Island. 90 miles off São Paulo sits an island you're legally not allowed to set foot on. Not fill out a permit not allowed. The Brazilian Navy will physically turn your boat around not allowed. It's called Ilha da Queimada Grande. Most people just call it Snake Island, because subtlety wasn't really required. It's small, about 106 acres, roughly the size of an airport, and it's the only place on Earth you'll find the golden lancehead pit viper. How many of them are actually out there is genuinely up for debate. You'll see 1 snake per square meter thrown around a lot online, but the real number's almost certainly lower than that. But nobody's exactly lining up to go count. Here's the reason this snake in particular is worth caring about. When the island broke off from the mainland around 11,000 years ago, its food supply changed overnight, from whatever you'd find on the mainland to migratory birds that touch down for a few minutes and take off again. You can't hunt a bird that's about to fly away with slow venom. So, over thousands of years, the golden lancehead developed one of the fastest-acting venoms of any pit viper alive. Local legend has it that the island's last lighthouse keeper and his family died here. Snakes supposedly got in through a window one night, decades ago. There's no solid record proving it happened exactly like that, which, honestly, only makes it a better story, not a worse one. What we do know for certain: scientists are the only people allowed on the island now, and even they go in pairs with a medic standing by, because regular antivenom barely puts a dent in this stuff. So, if you were shopping for a secluded island getaway, this one's about as private as it gets. Just maybe don't ask too many questions about the previous owner. Location 2. Danakil Depression, Ethiopia. If Snake Island hides its danger behind a scenic name, the Danakil Depression doesn't even try. It's one of the hottest inhabited places on the planet. Average temperatures sit above 94 degrees Fahrenheit all year round, with active volcanoes, acid lakes in colors that look photoshopped, and sulfur fields pumping toxic gas into air that's already unpleasant to breathe. And people live on the edge of it. On purpose. The Afar people have mined salt out of these flats for centuries, and they're still doing it today, cutting slabs by hand, loading them onto camels, and then walking them out across some of the harshest ground on Earth. That's not a figure of speech. That's their actual commute, through acid pools and volcanic gas. Some families have made this same walk for generations. Now, here's the detail that really puts it in perspective. NASA sends researchers to the Danakil Depression, not because of the danger, because of the chemistry. Acid pools, hydrothermal vents, this is about as close as Earth gets to early Mars, so it's become a testing ground for instruments built for another planet entirely. Sit with that for a second. It's a landscape so alien, we use it to rehearse space exploration. And there are people who call it home, hauling salt across it every week, the same way their grandparents did. Location 3. Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, Ukraine. In 1986, a reactor failure at Chernobyl emptied out roughly 1,000 square miles of Ukraine. You already know that part, everyone does. What doesn't get talked about as much, a few hundred people moved back in. They're called the Samosaili, the self-settlers, mostly elderly, mostly from villages inside the zone. Relocated after the disaster, and then, quietly, over the following years, they came home anyway. Not by accident, on purpose. Given the choice between the radiation they already knew and starting over somewhere unfamiliar, they picked the radiation. There's no neat way to explain that, and we're not going to pretend there is. It's just true. Some people looked at one of the most contaminated places on the planet and decided it was still more theirs than anywhere else they'd been offered. That's the part worth sitting with. Not the numbers, the choice. Location 4, Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA. Okay, break from the heat and the radiation for a second, because this next one's just strange. Under the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, a coal seam has been on fire since 1962. Not a wildfire or a house fire, a fire burning underground, non-stop for over 60 years that no one has ever managed to put out. The town used to have over 1,000 people, but today it's down to a handful. Smoke still leaks up through cracks in the road, and pavement itself has buckled and split from the heat rising underneath it. In 2002, the Postal Service actually revoked the town's zip code. If Centralia rings a bell, it might be because it's the real inspiration behind Silent Hill, the game and movie about a town consumed by something under the ground. The fog and the monsters were invented. The fire wasn't. There's nothing exotic about Centralia. No volcano, no jungle, no record-breaking temperature. It's just an ordinary American town where the ground quietly stopped being safe. And maybe that's exactly what makes it the most unsettling place on this list. It could, in theory, happen almost anywhere there's coal underneath the dirt. Location 5, Everest's Death Zone. Above 8,000 meters on Everest, there's a stretch climbers call the Death Zone. Not for drama, it's literal. Up there, the air holds about a third of the oxygen your body actually needs. You're not adjusting to that altitude. You're dying there, slowly, the whole time you're in it. The only real question is whether you get back down before it finishes the job. More than 200 bodies are still up there. Recovery is too dangerous, so a lot of them have simply become part of the route. Climbers navigate by grim nicknames like Green Boots because a body has been in the same spot for so long, it's basically a landmark now. And the cold and the wind aren't even the worst part. Low oxygen wrecks the exact judgment you'd need to turn back in time. Most people don't die up there because they didn't understand the risk. They die because, by the moment it actually mattered, their brain could no longer reliably tell them so. And people pay for this. Permits and full expeditions can run anywhere from $40,000 to well over $100,000 for the privilege of voluntarily walking into a zone that is, quite literally, named after death. Location 6, Oymyakon, Russia. Now, let's flip it. The coldest place on Earth, where people don't just visit, they live there. Permanently. Oymyakon, Russia, holds the record for the coldest permanently inhabited town on the planet. A recorded low of -71.2 degrees Fahrenheit. About 500 people call it home. Here's what that actually looks like on an average day. Cars run around the clock because if the engine shuts off, it might just never start again. Buried pipes are pointless. The ground freezes too deep for that, so all the plumbing runs above ground, wrapped in insulation, like the whole town is dressed for winter. And there's a local tradition that's half practical, half party trick. Toss a cup of vodka into the air. If it doesn't freeze before it hits the ground, it's not actually cold enough to justify staying inside yet. Most residents descend from reindeer herders, generations deep into figuring out how to live somewhere the rest of us would tap out on within 10 minutes. They haven't beaten the cold. They've just built an entire life around never underestimating it. Of everywhere on this list, Oymyakon might be the best answer to the question we keep coming back to. Why would anyone live here? Sometimes it's simpler than you'd expect. This is just where their family has always been. Location 7, Antarctica's interior, Vostok Station. And finally, the most extreme place on this list, and the coldest spot on the entire planet. In 1983, thermometers at Vostok Station, deep in Antarctica's interior, recorded -128.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Still the coldest natural temperature ever measured on Earth's surface. Add winds over 300 kilometers an hour and months of total darkness through the polar winter, and suddenly everything else on this list looks almost tame by comparison. And yet, 2.5 miles under all that ice, there's something that shouldn't really be there. Lake Vostok, liquid water sealed off from the surface world for possibly millions of years. In 2012, after decades of planning, researchers finally drilled down and reached it, with no real idea what, if anything, might be living in water that old and that cut off from everything. A handful of scientists still live at Vostok Station today, months at a stretch, in the harshest environment on the planet. Not because they have to, because we wanted to know what was down there badly enough to actually go find out. Every place on this list has one thing in common, and it has nothing to do with heat or cold or venom. At some point, someone looked at a spot the planet very clearly did not want us in, and decided to try anyway. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep watching more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.